Hello my friends, I'm Duchess and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'll be showing you how I create dynamic sound effects for my Webtoon. Let's get started. Disclaimer, I am not a professional artist or Webtoon creator, but I would like to help you guys out as much as I can with what I already know about Webtoon. Thank you so much to Chariots 8X for requesting this video. I'm so happy that you guys like my videos and would like me to teach you more about what I know. Let me know down in the comments below if you guys have any questions or would like to request a specific video. I'd love to make more. Here's a blank canvas that we're going to be working on. I don't actually have a canvas that I can work on since I already finished the line art for the episode that I'm currently working on, but this blank canvas will do. When I first started out on Webtoon, I wanted to make the text look very similar to an authentic Webtoon, so I used the font Jack Armstrong on Procreate. This font is pretty much the exact same, if not the exact same, as the font that most Webtoon creators use. The font size I use for texts is size 7. Now, when there are sound effects that I need to write out, I usually change up the size of the font. For example, for a gasp, a sigh, a mumble, etc., I usually decrease the font size to 5. This is because the sound isn't super obvious or loud, and I think this can be portrayed if you decrease the font size. For an effect that isn't meant to be super quiet or loud, I usually settle for the font size 15. Now, if it's a huge explosion, a shout, or some kind of abrupt sound, then I usually increase the size significantly. I usually use size 30 or even 45 for extreme sounds. I try to stay pretty consistent with the font sizes I use, so I don't usually have any words or sounds with a bunch of different font sizes. Now, I significantly increase the size of the louder sound effects, but I don't significantly decrease the size of the smaller sound effects. For the smaller sound effects, I only decrease the font size from 7 to 5 because you don't want the text so small that the readers can't actually read it. Clip Studio has a lot of features specifically for comic making, and Procreate doesn't really have that, but it has the basic necessities. To make more dynamic sound effects, I use the warp tool on the top left. It's the last button here. So this button basically allows you to change up the composition, shape, and curve of whatever you have selected. Let's use the sound scream. Let's pretend that this scream is a terrible and agonizing scream. It's horrific. So we want to portray this emotion and feeling into the readers because when you read Webtoons with great effects, you can feel that chill down your spine, and that's kind of what we want to try to imitate. So let's use Jack Armstrong font at size 40 because this is a scream and screams are pretty loud. If you want, you can also use a different font that looks scarier. I'm not sure which fonts exactly, but I'm sure if you look through all of these fonts, you'll find one that gives off kind of a creepy vibe. Now, use the warp tool. There are 4 main options here, which are freeform, uniform, distort, and warp. Freeform means you can basically change the size of the selected area however you want. You can elongate it, shorten it, etc. Uniform only lets you increase or decrease the size of the selected area. Like in math, it basically stays the same and doesn't change the height or length. Distort is my favorite option. This allows you to adjust each of the 4 corners of the selected area. You can make one corner stretch out, you can pull out the corner inward, and adjust it accordingly. I like to use this for drawing and for sound effects. The last option is warp, and this is actually pretty good for creating dynamic sound effects as well. I feel like it's more for mysterious sounds because you can adjust every curve of the selected area, or not necessarily mysterious, but you can use this for all types of sounds. For the scream sound effect, I'm going to use the distort option. So here I stretch out the corner of the word. Now, usually sounds are loud, but it does fade into the distance, right? So when you're, especially a scream. So I stretch out one side of the text and make the other side smaller. When you're drawing and writing, the characters will hear the scream very clearly, and you read from top to bottom, right? So you'll see the character right here, and then you see the start of the word scream, and as you scroll downwards, you'll see the rest of the word. This is the flow of motion, if that makes sense. Like sometimes when you read a scene where there's a lot of action or something intense is happening, you'll feel that intense energy as well, and that's because of the way the creator, author, or illustrator has placed their drawings, their words, and their sound effects. They're able to create that flow of motion, which allows you to feel that same energy. So that's why I stretch the top part and decrease the smaller part. Another thing I think you could do to make this sound more intense is change the color. I'm going to make the color of this scream red, bright red. Color also plays a very important role in creating sound effects. Every color gives off a certain feeling or vibe. For example, green is envy. It can also be disgust. Red is usually associated with fear or with passion. Blue can be sadness, or it can just be really cold, like someone who is really cold can just have blue sound effects. Now let's make a sound that is not as scary, and maybe let's just pick a simple sound like twirl, which isn't really a sound. But for Webtoons, sound effects are often made for the simplest things to emphasize certain things that happen. For example, when someone turns around in a Webtoon, the sound effect turn is always there, even if it's kind of obvious that the character turned around. Sometimes I don't use very dynamic effects and I keep the sound written pretty plainly. However, it's nice to add some variation so it's more interesting. So the motion of the twirling is pretty round and smooth, right? Twirling isn't super loud, but I want to emphasize the action of my character twirling, so I'm going to use font size 15. This time I'm going to use the warp tool and the warp option. There are these guidelines which show you how you can adjust the selected area. So my character is wearing a dress, and when you twirl, dresses flow a bit outward. So there's this curve because the dress is flowing. So I'm going to emphasize the twirling by using the warp tool to curve the sound effect the way that the dress would be curved, if that makes sense. It wouldn't look as good if you just kept the word as it is and then pasted it onto her dress, because it doesn't exactly fit with the action. Now it flows well with the dress and it looks pretty good if you do curve it the way the dress is curved. This is also part of what I mentioned earlier about making the flow of motion. Now, instead of showing you guys every single possible effect you can use for every single sound, I'm just going to show you how you can use the Procreate tools to add more dynamics to your sounds. Now, if you look and explore this area, you'll see that there's actually a lot of options here. For example, in the style section here, there are 3 options: regular, italic, and bold italic. I don't usually use these options in my Webtoon, but you can definitely use it if that's what you like. You can experiment with it, and I probably will experiment with these someday soon. Now you have the next section, which is the design section. You have font size, then kerning. Kerning is the space between your letters. You can make your letters far spaced from each other or super close. You could probably use this if you have a scene where a character is rambling on and on and on. You could space the letters closer together to show how much the character is speaking, and like there's literally no space between each word. You know what I mean? So tracking is pretty close, pretty much the same as kerning from what I know. I tried all of these out before when I first started Procreate, but I don't actually use most of them. The next 2 options aren't really important for sound dynamics, in my opinion, so I'm not going to go over them. The last section is attributes. I always keep my words centered, so I never touch the first part. The one thing I use on this is this O here. This hollows out your text, and I think it has a pretty cool effect. I use this sometimes for things like a super important and huge sound. I think because it's hollow, it kind of gives off a mysterious kind of vibe, so that's why I use it. The last thing on this section are these capital T's. This is if you want to make all your text in caps. The font I use is in caps no matter what, so if you don't use Jack Armstrong font, that's probably the only reason you'd use it. I'm not actually the best at making dynamic sound effects, but I hope that I gave you guys a few important pieces of information that can help you guys make your texts a little bit more interesting. I just picked up a few things from observing the webtoons that I read. If you really want to know more about creating different kinds of sound effects, I'd highly recommend closely observing some of your favorite webtoons and seeing how they make theirs so dynamic. That is all I have for you guys this week. If you enjoyed this week's video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get notified. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you guys next week.